And speaking of explanations for things that Frank thinks that atheism needs to answer for, we're coming up on our next video where Frank is going to refute the idea that evolution explains morality. Now, the evolution of morality, or why morality is beneficial to our species, may be explained by evolution, but as far as morality itself, like what is moral and immoral, is never explained by evolution. Evolution just explains why groups of organisms change and adapt over time. And while morality might play into that a little bit as far as the human species goes, what is moral and what is immoral has never been under the purview of evolution. This is similar to how most apologists view atheism as far as explaining our reality. Like we just saw Frank Turek go over, they think that atheism has to explain other aspects of reality that they can't explain without God. Atheism doesn't have to do that because all that we have to do is say, well, your evidence doesn't support your conclusion, therefore I don't believe in your God or in any gods, because nobody's evidence supports the conclusion that a God exists. And that's all that we gotta do. We don't have to provide alternative explanations. But because of this, it seems like apologists just invent things to explain morality and consciousness and all these other things. They invent reasons that we come up with, which is where this video comes in.
Where does this moral obligation come from that we ought not murder people?
Well, it comes from us there, Frank, because morality is inherently subjective. The whole idea that we ought not to murder people is a social norm that developed over thousands of years. You know, as we grew into bigger and bigger societies, it was not advantageous for us to just wantonly I can't say that word without laughing now. It's not advantageous of us to just wantonly kill each other in a society. We have to have order. We have to have, repercussions for actions. If a society is going to survive and thrive, we can't just have people going around killing people just because they don't like them. So that developed as a social norm that we now consider to be some ought. Like to be a part of a functioning society, you ought not to murder somebody. Now, of course, that's not you ought not kill somebody, because there are nuances in which, you may entail you killing somebody. So there are situations where killing somebody may not be immoral. But when we're talking about murder, we're talking about the illegal taking of human life. And so we cannot have that in a society that hopes to function, that hopes to survive, and hopes to thrive for a long period of time. So we have made this an ought. Just like morality, we have constructed this.
What makes life valuable if there is no God?
Whether there is a God or there isn't a God, we are the ones that value life. We are the ones that place values on things in our reality, on other objects in our reality. I'm not trying to dehumanize anybody as far as what Frank's talking about here, but what I'm talking about is other objects that we experience in our reality, humans included. We place value on those things. Even in our own lives, we have different values for different people in our lives. Like, I value my son and my wife far more than I value some random person out there. Now, does that mean that I don't value human life in general? No. It means that I value life in like a tiered way. As far as the ones that are closest to me, I value more than somebody that I'm not connected to. And that's just how it is for most people out there. Again, that doesn't mean that I don't value human life or people. It just means that I have a reasonable sense about who I place value on in this life.
Nothing. That's the problem.
No, that's not the problem, because you're wrong. We are the ones that place value on things. Also, does God really value life? I'm not seeing a whole lot of valuing life in the Bible. We just got done with the Old Testament in our daily Bible podcast, which you can get to by clicking that link in the description. But in the Old Testament, I really don't see God valuing life all that much. What does God value? At least in the Old Testament, he values people worshiping him. That's what he values. So it's not life that he values. He only values the lives of people that are obedient and worship him. That's it. A good example of this is all of the mass slaughter that happens in the Old Testament. If life was valuable to God, then he would not call for the slaughter of innocent children like he does in Numbers 31, in Samuel, and all of these places. God calls for the slaughter of little children. God even has the Holy Spirit come into Egypt and kill all the innocent firstborn children of the Egyptians. God does not value life. So I don't know what in the fuck Frank Turek is talking about, that life is only valuable in light of God, because I don't see God valuing life. I see God valuing his worship. I mean, if you want to talk about fragility, that's off the fucking charts.
You know, outside every road here, there is a speed limit, right? You can see right outside here, it might say 35 miles an hour. You can know the speed limit and deny that there was someone behind that speed limit. You can know it, but the reason there's a speed limit sign is because there's some authority that put that sign up, right?
Well, yes. And I mean, sometimes those speed limits, people disagree with them and they exceed them. I feel like most of the time people exceed speed limits in some kind of capacity. I feel like a speed limit sign is definitely not a good analogy for what he's trying to say here, because he's trying to say that God has imposed these moral laws on us, these moral authority. Our speed limit laws and speed limits in certain areas are not so fixed as Frank Turek is talking about. Because while there is an authority behind the speed limit signs, that's because we live in a society. If we take society out of it and just somebody puts up a speed limit sign on a road and there's like nobody there to enforce it, what does that even fucking mean? Why are you putting that up there, bro? I'm not going to follow that. I didn't agree to this. Of course, us living in our society, we have agreed to, follow the rules of the road whenever we get a license, and our society allows us to operate motor vehicles on a roadway. We've agreed to follow the laws of the road, and that's what that is. Now, morality is very different than that, in that we do have some laws on the books that seem to intersect with our morality, like don't murder people, you ought not to murder people, and stuff like that. The problem is that our sense of morality is subjectively built off of social norms in the society that we exist in, the norms of our parents that they teach us. And these can be radically different at times. Although they may share some commonalities with each other, they could be radically different. I really don't think that Frank Turek is thinking out his analogy here with the speed limit sign. And I think the simplistic thing that he's drawing from this is just that there's an authority that sets the speed limits, just like there's an authority, God, that sets the moral foundation. Everybody's moral foundation is subjectively built by them. And Frank seems to be confusing this absolute moral foundation that we have with the common foundation that is found within a society. Because everybody that's a productive member that's in our society, that's not causing trouble, not being thrown in jail or anything like that, we've all agreed to certain sets of social norms that we're all going to follow. Now, whether or not, that's because it's been imposed on us or anything like that, this is what we exist within. But we still all actively create our own moral foundations. And just because our moral foundations share some aspects in common with the rest of the society that we exist within doesn't mean that it's not subjective.
What we're talking about as Christians is not whether you can read the sign. We all agree you can. We're saying the only thing that makes sense for universal moral obligation, for universal morality, is a standard that we're obligated to obey, and that standard can only be God's nature.
I disagree with that, because I don't think that there's a universal moral standard that we all have to obey. I think that there's like a common moral foundation that everybody shares within their own given society. And I think that all societies could potentially have some overlapping portions of a moral foundation that we all adhere to because of how big societies are now. I think that there is sort of this core that produces a thriving and surviving society. But just because all of that is kind of what works for our social species does not mean that it's a universal moral standard or moral foundation like Frank is trying to make it out to be here. Of course, he is advocating for the Christian moral foundation, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, considering the fact that the Christian moral foundation has changed radically over the ages. If you just look a few hundred years ago, it was perfectly fine as a Christian to advocate for the ownership of another person as property. Chattel slavery. They use Christianity to, keep slaves in slavery for the longest time. And they rationalize keeping slaves with Christianity because Christianity and their Bible has slave laws in it. It has God directly commanding the Israelites to purchase slaves from other nations. To suggest that Christianity provides the ultimate and absolute moral foundation is just ridiculous when you consider how this foundation of Christianity has changed so much over just the past couple of hundred years. So I really don't know what in the fuck Frank Turek is talking about here.
Evolution can't give you that. Evolution is a biological process that has no authority to tell you what to do.
I agree. Yep, that evolution does not explain morality, like what is moral, what isn't moral. It doesn't give you a moral foundation or anything like that. Evolution is a biological process that explains how organisms change and adapt to their environment over time. So I agree with him on this point. I don't know why he's bringing it up. It seems kind of fucking random. I don't know if the person that asked the question from the audience was like, evolution explains morality. What now? Boom, kind of thing. I don't know if that happened, but if anybody is saying, well, morality is explained by evolution, I feel like you got to explain that nuance a little bit. I think you can explain why morality factors into evolution as a beneficial trait of a social group. Like, I think you can explain it that way, but in the context of explaining what is moral and what is immoral, evolution doesn't help us. So don't use it that way, but you can explain why our moral sense developed using evolution, not what is moral.